Lonely Rancher bought a beautiful Apache slave woman.
Long road
Next
ahead,
day,
man.
she was his
Trying to
wife.
keep up.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The yard behind the freight office in Copper Bend had been beaten flat by boots and hooves until the dirt was hard as iron. A low platform stood there, its boards warped from rain and sun, nail heads jutting up like small teeth. Cold morning air carried the smoke of men's breath, and the yard murmured with the scrape of coins, the shuffle of boots, the rise and fall of one practiced voice, the auctioneer's. Sheriff Elias Monroe leaned against a porch post beneath the eaves, hat brim pulled low, eyes sweeping the crowd with that steady weight a man uses when he intends to keep order without ever raising his hand unless he must. His presence made the gathering less wild than it might have been, but not by much. On the platform stood the woman they had come to see. The torn edge of a deerskin dress gaped at her shoulder and along her hip where a rope had cut the fringe. Dust clung to her face, but she did not wipe it away. Her hair was braided tight, leather-bound, with a single feather resting against her collarbone. She did not lower her head, though the crowd pressed it down with their stares. Her spine held straight as a fence post in new ground, and that defiance made some men grin, others mutter. Nayeli had been dragged into town before dawn, wrists rubbed raw from the ties that had held her to a mule's lead. She did not let her eyes linger on the men at the rails. Instead, she sent them out sharp and quick, measuring, searching. A hunter's gaze, even while hunted. Ethan Callahan had not come for this. His horse was tied on the street out front. His pocket held a folded list. Nails, salt, a tin of axle grease, and enough wire to mend fence before spring. That was the plan, a simple plan. But plans bend easy in a place like Copper Bend. The moment he heard the chant of the auctioneer, he felt it stir something old in him, something he had tried to bury under years of work and silence. The scar on his thigh tugged with the cold, memory of a bullet crease that still woke him on rough nights. His knuckles itched under the glove seam where another scar had settled long ago. He told himself to keep walking, buy the nails, speak with Monroe about the riders spotted near the creek line, ride home before dark. That was what he repeated in his head. Yet his eyes would not leave the platform, nor the woman who refused to bow beneath the weight of so many watching. The crowd leaned forward, mouths half open, as though appraising a horse. The auctioneer's patter ran quick, polished, cruel. Ethan's jaw tightened. He counted the nails and salt in his head again, like a prayer, trying to steady himself. But already he knew the day would not go as planned. The auctioneer's chant rose, numbers flying sharp as nails on a tin roof. Laughter followed when he cracked a joke at the woman's expense, and the sound carried across the yard like dry grass catching fire. A hand shot up at the rail, and the bidding began in earnest, quick, shallow increments, meant less to buy than to entertain. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands low, jaw locked. His chest felt tight, the way it had when he was young, and the world seemed set on stripping him bare. He told himself it was none of his business. Sheriff Monroe couldn't shut it down without drawing a riot. The parson had already withdrawn to his small house. Men had their vices, and this yard was one of them. But still, the sight of her holding her shoulders square against so many eyes lit something deep in him, something he had carried since the war. He remembered the men left in mud, names lost to numbers, dignity stripped like bark off green wood. He had sworn, more than once, he would not stand idle while someone was ground under the heel of others. And yet here he was, torn between nails and salt and the memory of that promise. The auctioneer barked another number. A murmur rolled through the yard. The bidder at the rail smirked, certain of his prize. Ethan exhaled slow, then raised his hand. The yard hushed as though the wind had shifted. His bid cut through the noise, higher than play, but not beyond reach. A few men shifted, surprised. Another tried to answer, then dropped his gaze when Ethan's eyes found him. The chant faltered, then stumbled forward again, shorter now, weaker. The bid stood alone. The hammer fell with a practiced clap. The clerk hurried out, paper and pencil in hand, ink still damp, eager to seal the transaction. He thrust the bill of sale toward Ethan, who took it without looking. The paper was warm from the clerk's fingers. He glanced once at the line where her name should have been, blank, as though she had no name worth writing. His throat burned. With a sharp pull, he tore the paper in two. Both halves fluttered into the dust, where the wind carried them toward the rail. The crowd gasped, then muttered, voices tangled with confusion and anger. Ethan spoke quietly, but the words carried to the ears that needed to hear them. "You're coming with me." He did not reach for her arm. He did not wave the torn paper as proof. He only turned enough so she could see the open road beyond the yard. His eyes flicked once toward Sheriff Monroe. The sheriff straightened from the post, rolling one shoulder, his hand settling lazy but certain on the butt of his holstered Colt. "Keep it peaceable," he said. The warning was also permission. A few men at the rail bristled, ready to test the moment. But when they caught Monroe's gaze, the fight drained from them. Nayeli measured Ethan in that instant, the gray at his temples, the break across his nose, the way he stood not like a victor, but like a man who had once carried burdens heavier than himself and still kept walking. She looked for the small tells, eyes that dragged down her dress, hands that twitched, hunger gnawing at the jawline. She found none. Fear settled hard under her ribs, but it was the steady kind that kept a person awake. She did not give gratitude. She owed none. What she owed herself was a clear head and a plan. She stepped down from the platform without taking the hand a boy offered, her chin level, her stride even. No show for the crowd, no chase for the men who might want one. Ethan walked beside her, the noise of the yard parting grudgingly around them. The day had bent. Nothing about it would be simple now. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments. The road out of Copper Bend ran straight for half a mile before it bent toward the low mesas. Dust hung in the cold air where the horses' hooves had stirred it, then settled again as if nothing had passed. The sound of the town dimmed behind them, clattering boards, men's laughter, a hammer striking somewhere far off. Ethan Callahan kept his gelding a half-length ahead, just enough to shield her without making it plain. Sheriff Monroe had stayed on the boardwalk as they left, leaning with one shoulder against a post. He did not wave, did not speak, but his hand rested close to his Colt, and his gaze followed 2 ranch hands who looked like they might step out. That was the kind of protection a man gave without asking for thanks. Nayeli sat straight in the saddle of the spare mare. The wool coat he had handed her covered the worst of the torn deerskin dress, but she could still feel the rawness at her wrists where the rope had bitten deep. She had not spoken since the yard, not when he gave her the reins, not when he offered the canteen. Silence was safer. Silence could not be twisted into gratitude she did not feel, or promises she did not make. She studied the man who had lifted his hand in that auction, the one whose silver had silenced the jeers. His hair carried a strand of gray at the temples, his shoulders carried the set of someone used to lifting more than fence posts. A scar crossed the knuckles of his right hand, the kind that came from a fight finished too close. His boots were worn smooth from years in the stirrups. She searched for rope, for the quick smile of a man who wanted too much, but she saw neither. The silence between them pressed harder than the wind. Ethan felt it like the weight of a question that had no clean answer. He had not planned for this ride. His pocket money was meant for nails and seed, not for tearing up a clerk's bill of sale. But now the woman rode beside him, and that paper lay in the dirt of the yard, split in two. His jaw tightened when he thought of the hands who had dragged her there. He did not glance back, though his ears strained for hoofbeats that did not belong to them. A man learned on battlefields to count the silences as much as the sounds. The mare shifted under Nayeli as if sensing her tension. She steadied her seat, back straight, chin level. She would not give them the sight of her hunched or broken. Her grandmother's voice stirred in memory. Keep your head high. Even if they steal your ground, they cannot steal the sky above it. A crow wheeled overhead, calling once before it glided toward the cottonwoods along the creek line. Ethan let his gelding drop into an easier pace, careful not to push her horse too hard on the first mile. The sun lay pale and thin over the flats, the kind of light that stretched shadows long and made every ridge look sharper. Neither spoke. The first mile was not for words. It was for listening, to hooves, to wind, to the way silence can settle between two strangers who had been forced into the same road. The land opened wider as they rode north, the flats giving way to cottonwoods that clung stubbornly to the creek beds. Their branches rattled in the winter wind, bare fingers clawing at the sky. Beyond, mesas rose in patient layers of red and ochre, their sides cut sharp as if God himself had laid down a blade. Shadows pooled at the base of those cliffs, where coyotes sometimes watched and waited. The horses moved steady, hooves clicking against patches of frozen ground. The gelding blew mist from his nostrils, Boone's saddle creaking in rhythm with Ethan's weight. The mare beneath Nayeli tested the bit, then settled as though she understood that her rider carried a different kind of strain. Nayeli kept her gaze on the horizon. Every bend in the creek reminded her of the day before, when two ranch hands had spoken soft to slow her steps, and another had come from behind. She could still feel the press of rough hands, the snap of cloth tearing where a rope had caught. Laughter, always the laughter of men when cruelty came easy. She forced her breath even. Her grandmother's voice steadied her. Sing low to keep your hands steady. Even in darkness, song gives you back your name. Nayeli did not sing aloud now. Her throat was too tight for that. But the rhythm of the words moved in her chest like a heartbeat. She straightened her spine against the memory. Ethan glanced at her once, then looked away. He had learned not to stare. A man didn't need to carve wounds deeper with his eyes. He fixed his gaze on the trail instead, tracing the way it curved toward a dry riverbed. Memory rose unbidden. The year 66, a stretch of ground not worth the bullets, where his brother had fallen with his mouth still open in surprise. The field had been a mire of smoke and cries, the kind that clung to a man's lungs long after he left. He had walked away with half a regiment missing and a scar that woke in cold weather. Company had felt useless after that. Too many words spent on cards, too much silence at night when another man's breathing should have been there. He had traded dice for a shovel, whiskey for wire, and built fences in a land where the wind never quit. But now he rode beside someone again, and the silence between them was not empty, it was waiting. The sun climbed higher, washing the mesas in gold. Hawks circled overhead, their shadows crossing the trail like fleeting omens. The creek line narrowed, water running slow beneath a thin skin of ice. Ethan measured the pace, careful not to tire the mare under her. Nayeli pressed her raw wrists against the wool coat. Pain kept her sharp, awake. She studied Ethan's shape in the saddle, the way he carried himself, not boastful, not loose, but steady. She marked each detail the way a hunter marks tracks. Not trust, not yet, but information she could use if the road turned. The land stretched before them, unbending and honest in its hardness. And still they rode, two strangers bound by torn paper and a choice neither had spoken aloud. By midday the road bent toward a shallow draw where the creek cut through gravel. Thin ice clung to the edges, cracking softly as the horses lowered their heads to drink. Ethan dismounted with a grunt, boots crunching against stone. He looped the reins over a low branch and crouched to test the water with his palm. Cold enough to burn, clean enough to drink. Nayeli slid from the mare's back without help. Her legs trembled once, then steadied. She kept a hand near the saddle, her eyes moving quick, sky, ridgeline, water. Always watching, always measuring. Ethan pulled a small tin from his coat pocket, the lid scratched from years of use. He held it in one hand, glove half off, the other palm open at his side. "Let me see," he said. The words were quiet, almost plain. No demand, just an offer laid on the table. Nayeli did not move at first. She weighed the distance to the horses, the angle of his shoulders, the weight of the colt on his hip. The silence stretched long enough for the creek to speak in her place. Then, slowly, she held out her wrists. Rope burns ran angry and raw across the skin. Ethan hooked his glove off with his teeth, thumbed the lid open, and worked a dab of salve across the welts. He did it careful, eyes on the task, not on her face, not on the torn line of her dress. His touch pressed just firm enough to soothe, never more. "Winter hands," he murmured, "keeps the sting down." Nayeli watched him work, waiting for the slip, the look that wandered, the hand that claimed more than it gave. It never came. When he finished, he closed the tin, then placed it in her hand. "Yours now," he said. The weight of the small thing startled her. Ownership had been stripped from her yesterday morning, and now here was a stranger giving her something she controlled. She tucked it into the pocket of the wool coat with one swift motion, a promise she chose to keep. They ate standing. Ethan passed her a strip of jerky and a heel of bread he had shoved into his saddlebag at dawn. She chewed slow, letting the salt and the chew anchor her. The food steadied her legs, loosened the coil of her stomach. Ethan drank from the canteen and offered it across. She hesitated, then took it. The tin tasted of metal and cold. Their fingers did not brush, but the space between them eased a notch. For a long while, the only sounds were water under ice, horses breathing steam, and the slow grind of teeth on jerky. The silence was no longer sharp. It had softened, bent into something that did not press so hard on the ribs. Nayeli wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked once at him. Just once. Not gratitude, not surrender. Only acknowledgement that he had done no harm when he could have. They mounted again. The sun tilted west, shadows stretching across the road. The day was not safer than the one before, but the silence between them had shifted. Where it had been a wall, now it was a bridge half built. The land stretched flat again, scrub and stone breaking the horizon into jagged lines. They had ridden another mile when the faint rhythm of hooves reached them from behind. Ethan's shoulders tightened, his hand drifting near the Henry that rode in the scabbard beneath his leg. Nayeli heard it too. Her back stiffened, eyes cutting to the trail without turning her head. She had learned long ago to listen for the count of hoofbeats. How many belonged to her, how many to someone else. This rhythm was not theirs. A rider came into view at a lope that wanted to be noticed. He wore a hat too new, boots too clean. His smile carried more teeth than warmth. He pulled up just far enough to hover in the space where a man could claim he wasn't crowding. "You paid high," the ranch hand drawled, eyes sliding where they had already tried to slide in the yard. "Could 'a' had cheaper if you'd waited till afternoon." Ethan didn't answer. He shifted the gelding half a step, setting his horse's shoulders square between Nayeli and the man. His right boot rested easy, heel hooked, as though he had all the time in the world. The ranch hand let out a chuckle. "The sheriff won't stand out here. Lot of road ahead. Could be we come to a different arrangement." Nayeli's pulse thudded hard in her throat. She searched Ethan's face for a tell, for anger, fear, or bluff. She found none. Only a steady calm, the kind that comes when a man has already decided where his line is drawn. Finally, Ethan spoke, voice even. "Sheriff says it's over." Not a threat, not an invitation, just a fact dropped heavy as a stone. The man's grin thinned. His eyes flicked to the Henry stock, the colt at Ethan's hip, the way Ethan sat as if ready to work through the job if need be. The silence pressed on him harder than words ever could. He clicked his tongue, turned his horse in a showy half-circle, dust kicking up under hoof. "Ain't over in the cards," he muttered, safe-face words for himself more than anyone else. Then he trotted back toward town, shoulders hunched now, hat brim pulled lower. The trail quieted again, only the wind cutting across the flats. Nayeli let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. She made sure the sound came soft so it wouldn't land like thanks and it wouldn't sound like fear leaving. "If the sheriff hadn't been there," she began, voice rough. He was, Ethan cut in, steady as before. That's the measure. She filed the answer away. Men often spoke clean words on clean days, but weather had a way of changing them. She would test his words later, when the road offered no audience but the wind. For now, she sat straighter in the saddle, her wrists aching less, her mind busy weighing the man beside her. Not savior, not yet, but not like the others either. The miles ahead stretched quiet and long. Danger had passed for the moment, but its echo remained, hanging in the air between them like smoke after a fire. By late afternoon, the land broke into familiar shapes for Ethan. A sagging corral rail, cottonwoods tracing a frozen creek, the roofline of a plain house low against the sky. Boone, his rangy hound, loped from behind the barn, tail high, barking as though the yard had been empty too long. Ethan swung down at the gate, chain rattling in his hands. He pushed it wide so Nayeli could ride through first. The mare's ears flicked toward the barn, then the house, then settled. Boone sniffed at her boots, then at the hem of the wool coat, before backing off a pace as if he had decided politeness was the wiser path. The homestead was no grand thing. The barn leaned, the well rope showed fray, the house weathered years of wind. But it stood sound, stovepipe straight, hinges kite, windows square. A place built not for show, but for staying. Inside, the air smelled of bread cooled earlier, beans still warm on the stove. A small table held 2 blue tin cups and a loaf under a cloth. Hooks by the door bore nothing more than a coat and a hat. A rifle sat on the rack, empty and open. His Colt stayed holstered at his hip, not tossed careless on a chair. Nayeli walked slow, eyes catching every line. The latch on the inside of the spare room door. The window sash that stuck but lifted. The absence of any key. Each detail said something. No bars, no tricks, no corners meant to trap. Ethan stood by the table, letting her see all of it for herself. He didn't speak until her eyes came back to him. "You have choices," he said. "Stay here, leave in the morning, or walk with me to the parson if you want your name written clean. Door's yours to close or open." His words landed heavier than he knew. Yesterday, her name had been stripped from paper, sold like stock. Today, a stranger offered it back with nothing held in his fist. Her gaze lingered on the latch. The wood worn smooth from years of turning, simple, honest. Her grandmother once told her a house's truth is in its door, whether it opens from within or not at all. A verse rose unbidden, one she had heard when a missionary rode through her people's camp long ago, speaking with rough Spanish in a dust-filled chapel tent. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me." She had not understood it then. Now, with her hand resting on a latch that turned only from the inside, the words carried a weight that startled her. She didn't say them aloud, but she tested the latch once, heard it click, then set it back. For the first time since the mule rope had dragged her wrists raw, her shoulders loosened by a single notch. The sun dipped low beyond the cottonwoods. Tomorrow would bring its own reckoning, but tonight the choice of the door was hers. Dark settled over the flats in a slow hush. The stove ticked with steady heat, beans simmering low. Ethan cut thick slices of bread, set them on tin plates, and poured coffee that ran dark and bitter. He slid one plate across the table without comment, as if 2 places had always been set. Nayeli sat where she could see both the door and the window. She ate with quick, measured bites, never dropping her guard. Ethan ate slower, his eyes on the stove, on Boone sprawled near the threshold, on the small things men forget when used to eating alone. When the first plate was gone, he filled it again. No pause, no test. Just quiet provision. That, more than any words, eased the knot under her ribs. After the last swallow of coffee, silence stretched. Ethan set his fork down. His hands stayed on the table where she could see them. "You didn't give your name in the yard," he said. Her jaw worked once, then steadied.
Nayeli. The word felt strange, spoken after so many days of silence. It means I love you in my people's tongue. She did not flinch when she said it, though her voice caught at the edge. Ethan nodded once. Ethan McGraw. His voice held no flourish, only the weight of something carried too long. My brother fell at Shiloh. I came west after. Land, fence, quiet. Those were things I could keep when words didn't fit anymore. She studied him, searching for the cracks between his lines. She saw a scar pulling at his knuckles, the faint limp in his leg when he shifted, wounds that marked a man who had stood his ground before. When the meal was done, he carried the plates to the basin, washed them with clean motions, and set them to dry. He left space in every movement, never crowding, never reaching. At last he turned to her. Spare room's yours. Window sticks, but it lifts.
Latch turns from inside. No key, because I don't keep keys. She rose, slow and deliberate, and walked the short hall. The room was plain, a narrow bed, a faded quilt, a trunk with its hinge split. The window rattled but opened with a firm push. She tested the latch twice, then once more, listening to the sound it made under her hand. Back at the doorway, she paused. If I sleep here tonight, it's because I choose to. If I leave tomorrow, that's mine too. Ethan met her eyes, steady. That's the only way it works. She nodded once and stepped inside. The latch sat warm in her palm a moment longer before she let it fall into place, not as a prison, but as a promise. Boone stretched, settling across the hall where he could see both rooms. Ethan left his door open. No watch, no pressure, just quiet. For the first time since the mule rope, sleep came without jerking her awake. The house held its breath, learning the sound of two people breathing where before there had only been one. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey.
Dawn broke pale and thin, throwing light across the cottonwoods and the frost that rimmed the creek. Ethan had already been up, setting kindling, checking the fence line in his mind before his boots touched the ground. He poured coffee while Boone stretched and shook himself awake. Nayeli stepped from the spare room, her braid neat again, the deer-hide dress patched where her hands had mended it in the night. She looked rested, but her eyes still scanned corners before they settled. Trust did not grow overnight. They ate bread warmed on the stove. Ethan spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a kind of steadiness that seemed to clear the air. What posts needed bracing, when the ground might be ready for beans. Small things, work things. And yet, each word laid another stone in the foundation of something more lasting. After the meal, he saddled the horses. "We'll ride into town," he said. "Supplies, and if you want the parson, today is clean for it." He left the choice open, as he always did. Nayeli did not answer at once. She traced a finger over the edge of the coat he had given her. A coat was not a cage, but it was still something given. That line mattered. By mid-morning, the road stretched ahead, the air sharp in their lungs. Boone trotted at their flank until Ethan called him back to guard the house. The silence between man and woman was easier now, less brittle. Then, near the second rise, the quiet broke. A rider's silhouette cut against the sun, dust trailing behind. Nayeli felt her stomach seize. Ethan's jaw tightened as he slowed his gelding. The man reined in a little too close, hat cocked, grin showing too much teeth. She recognized him, a hand from the yard. The one whose laugh had followed the rip of her dress. "Well," the man drawled, "looks like you paid high for your prize. Coulda had her cheaper by afternoon." His gaze slid where it had no right to go. Ethan moved his gelding a half step, placing himself square between Nayeli and the rider. His hand did not touch his colt, but his posture carried the weight of a man ready to go the distance. "Sheriff said it's finished," Ethan said, voice flat. "Let it stay that way." The ranch hand spat in the dust, but his grin faltered when he caught the calm in Ethan's eyes. A calm that said any fight begun here would not end well for him. With a flick of reins, he wheeled his horse. "Ain't over in the cards," he muttered, before trotting back toward town. Nayeli let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding.
Ethan glanced once at her, then back to the road. No false comfort, no big words, just facts. That, more than any sermon, steadied her pulse. The danger had not struck, but it had shown its face. And both of them knew shadows do not ride out so easily. The road home stretched long and quiet. Dust from the riders still hung faint in the air behind them, like a ghost refusing to fall. Ethan kept his gelding half a length ahead, eyes on the horizon, scanning the mesquite shadows for another shape. Nayeli rode steady, but inside her chest the old fear clawed. Men like that one didn't quit easy. They waited. They circled. They came back when a door was left unlatched. By the time the ranch house came into view, the sagging corral rail, the line of cottonwoods holding the creek, the sun sat high and cold. Boone barked once at their approach, then dropped into a low wag when Ethan's voice reached him. Inside, the stove still held a soft glow from morning. Ethan tossed kindling, coaxing the flame higher. He spoke as if nothing had followed them home. "Eat first, then I'll check the north fence before dark." Nayeli stood by the window, watching the road they had ridden. Her hands tightened at the sill. "If he comes back," she said, "if more of them come, what then?" Ethan straightened from the stove, his face carved in the quiet patience of a man who had lived through worse. "Then they find me first. Sheriff saw the coin. Paper torn or not, no man carries claim on you now." Her eyes narrowed. Men don't need paper to take what they want. The words hung heavy between them. Ethan did not argue. He crossed to the table, set out bread, and poured water into a tin cup. Only then did he answer, "No, they don't. That's why you'll see me at the door before they see you." Nayeli turned, studying him. She saw no swagger, no boast, just the plain line of truth. Yet plain words could still break. She pressed harder. "Why did you bid?" Her voice was sharp now. "You had no reason. You don't know me. You could have ridden away." Ethan's jaw worked once. He sat slow, hands loose on the table. "Because I've seen yards like that before. Faces bent down because no one stood up. My brother fell so I could keep my name. I wasn't about to let yours be traded like mule stock." The room fell quiet. The only sound was Boone shifting by the door. Nayeli's throat tightened, but she forced her next words. "And tomorrow? Do you mean what you said? That if I walk, you'll walk me to the road?" Ethan's eyes held steady. "I meant it yesterday. I mean it now. And if you stay, that's yours too. Nothing changes except the latch you set with your own hand." Something eased in her shoulders, though she hid it. She looked away, out at the cottonwoods, where the creek ran slow under winter's grip. The fear had not gone, the danger had not passed. But a truth had been spoken, and truths, unlike promises, had weight. Night dropped fast over the flats. The sky stretched with cold stars. Inside the ranch house, the stove pulsed a steady heat, throwing light against the plain walls. Boone lay in his usual spot by the doorway, ears twitching at every snap of wind outside. Ethan cut salt pork into the pot, added beans, and let them simmer. The smell filled the small room, carrying a sense of order that nothing else that day had held. He worked without wasted movement, knife cleaned, board wiped, pan set aside. Nayeli sat at the table, fingers tracing the rim of the tin cup. She hadn't spoken since they dismounted. Her silence was not the silence of fear, but of thought. Finally, she said, "I have not told you what happened before the yard." Her eyes stayed on the cup. Ethan paused, the ladle resting in his hand. He did not press. He only said, "Tell it if you want it spoken." Her voice came low, steady but edged. 3 families crossed the dry river together. A trader swore the bed would hold if we hurried. It broke us instead. 2 men promised safe passage, but what they wanted was coin and daughters. My people scattered. Some fought, some fled. I was caught. She stopped, jaw set, the rest unspoken. Ethan stirred the pot once, slow, then set the ladle down. "You don't owe me more than that," he said. But she went on, her words harder now, as if each one had to be forced into daylight. They tied my wrists, cut my dress when the rope caught, laughed because no one stopped them. I told myself to keep my spine straight. That was the only part left to me. The stove popped, and Boone shifted with a low breath. Ethan leaned forward, forearms braced on the table. His eyes held no pity, only recognition. I carried my brother off a ridge in Virginia. He was already gone, but I carried him anyway. I told myself if I set him down, it would mean the war took more than it had already. For the first time, Nayeli looked straight at him. Pain met pain across the table, different in shape but carved from the same stone. "You don't flinch," she said quietly. "Most men flinch when I speak it." Ethan shook his head once. "Not flinching doesn't mean I don't hear. It means I know a wound when it's named, and I know it doesn't own you." Silence stretched, but it was not the brittle silence of strangers. It was a quiet that held room. Nayeli set her hands on the table, palms open, rope scars red against the skin. She did not offer them, but she did not hide them either. Ethan did not reach. He only said, "Eat, then rest. Tomorrow's work will come whether we carry yesterday or not." And for the first time since dawn, her breath eased. Dawn broke pale and brittle, frost clinging to the pump handle outside. Ethan was already at the stove, pouring coffee, when Nayeli stepped from the spare room. Her braid was tight, leather ties neat, the feather resting against her shoulder. The deer-hide dress she had mended framed her as she wished, not as the yard had torn it. He set a plate of bread and beans on the table without ceremony. "Eat first," he said. "The road's long enough without hunger tagging along." She sat, eyes on the window where the cottonwoods caught the first light. "And if we ride to town," she asked, "what waits for us there?" Ethan's voice stayed even. "Paper, a parson, and men who measure worth by coin. Some will want to test if what happened yesterday can be undone by noise." Nayeli held his gaze. "And can it?" His jaw tightened. "Not in daylight, not with a clerk's hand and a sheriff's witness. But words alone won't stop them from trying." The silence stretched as she chewed slowly, measuring his answer. "Finally," she said, "then we ride early, before their mouths wake." He nodded once. The plan was set. By the time they saddled, the sun had cleared the ridge. Boone barked twice and circled, restless, as if he sensed the day carried more weight than usual. Ethan tightened cinches, checked his colt, then looked at her square. "You still hold the choice. Stage road, parson, or stay here. I'll ride whichever way you name." Nayeli swung onto the spare mare, her wrists bandaged clean. She lifted her chin. "We ride to the parson. If they mean to spit, let them do it where God can hear." The ride into Copper Bend was quiet but taut. Every hoofbeat pressed against the waiting silence. When the first rooftops showed, Ethan slowed the gelding, scanning the street. Smoke rose from the cafe chimney, wagons lined the mercantile. Men loitered on the boardwalk with eyes sharp for news. As they passed, voices dropped to mutters. Some watched Nayeli with hunger thinly veiled. Others looked at Ethan with curiosity sharpened to judgment. A woman with a shawl tugged her child aside, whispering quick. Nayeli kept her back straight. She would not bend for their stares. Still, the weight of them pressed heavy, like hands she could not shake. Sheriff Monroe stood at the courthouse rail, hat low, eyes tracking the crowd. When he saw Ethan, he gave the smallest nod, a signal that meant the doorway would be guarded if needed. Ethan leaned in just enough for Nayeli to hear. Straight to the clerk, then the parson, no lingering. She nodded once. Her pulse beat hard, but her voice was steady. "Let's finish it in daylight." The church bell struck 8, thin and cold. Each toll marked the narrowing of time, the urgency of choice, the press of eyes. And every step of the horses carried them closer to the place where words would be written or broken.
The courthouse smelled of ink and old wood, its boards swept clean, but carrying the weight of every argument, every plea, every bargain ever made inside. Ethan pushed the door open, letting Nayeli step through first. Her steps were slow but steady, each one deliberate, as though she claimed the floorboards for herself. Behind the counter, the clerk barely lifted his head. His pen scratched across a ledger with bored precision. "Business?" he muttered. "License," Ethan said flatly. At that, the clerk's eyes flicked up. His gaze lingered on Nayeli too long before dropping to the desk again. "Names, ages, residence." Ethan started to answer, then stepped half a pace back. Nayeli's voice came instead, clear as she could make it. "Nayeli, 24.
Residence, 12 miles north, Stone Well at the Bend." The scratch of the pen paused, then continued. Ethan gave his name, his age, the same plain details. The clerk wrote them down, his mouth tight as if the ink itself resisted carrying the weight of her name beside his. "Witnesses?" the clerk asked without looking up. "The parson's wife will sign," Ethan said. "Sheriff Monroe if his time allows." That earned the clerk's first real reaction, a small sound, half scoff, half laugh. But when he glanced at Ethan's face and found no crack of humor there, he swallowed it. "Fees $2. Ethan laid the coins down slow, each one clicking against the counter like a nail driven in. The clerk scribbled a slip, sanded it, and pushed it across without ceremony. Ethan didn't touch it. Nayeli reached for it, folded it once, and slipped it into her coat. Outside, the street had thickened. 2 ranch hands leaned against the cafe wall, their voices pitched just loud enough to carry. "Man pays high, figures he owns what he bought." Nayeli's back stiffened, but she didn't falter. Ethan's jaw worked once, then stilled. Sheriff Monroe stepped from the courthouse rail, his presence a wall that required no words. The ranch hands shut their mouths before they'd truly started. They crossed to the parson's small room. A plain sign read "Weddings, Funerals, Thursdays." The parson's wife opened the door before they knocked. She carried a shawl over her arm and a pen that did not blot. "Come in," she said softly, "and stand easy." The parson rose from his desk, spectacles perched low. He looked at Nayeli long and steady, as if to weigh her silence more than her words. "Are you pressed?" he asked. Nayeli met his gaze without wavering. "No." He nodded once, turned to Ethan. "And you?" "No." The parson opened a small book, ribbon marking the page. "Names," he said. Ethan gave his. Nayeli followed, her voice firm. The parson's wife set the shawl around her shoulders without asking, a quiet act of shelter. Sheriff Monroe stepped in and took the place by the door, hat in hand, his eyes holding both the street and the room. The air grew thick with stillness. The parson read the vows plain, no pretty words, only the law of the territory. "Speak 'I do' if you mean it." Nayeli breathed once, then answered, "I do." Her voice did not break. Ethan's came after, steady, "I do." The ring passed from Ethan's palm to her hand, a plain circle of tin, seated without slip. No fumbling, no show. The parson closed the book. "Husband and wife," he said. And in that quiet room, with law written, witnesses standing, and heaven itself unseen but present, the matter was set beyond undoing. The parson's seal still glistened red on the folded paper when they stepped back into the morning. The street had filled, wagons rattling, boots on the boardwalk, men with idle eyes hunting for something to chew into talk. 2 ranch hands from the yard pushed off the cafe wall as Ethan and Nayeli crossed. Their shoulders turned wide, their mouths already primed for trouble. "Well now," one drawled, voice pitched to Carrie. "Seems a man can buy a wife same as he buys a mule. Question is, does she pull her weight?" A rough chuckle followed. The other leaned forward, eyes on Nayeli's dress. "Or maybe she's just too wild to break." The words hit sharp, meant to slice her down to silence. For a moment, the air thickened with the weight of choice. Step back or stand tall. Nayeli did not flinch. She kept her chin level, the folded paper pressed inside her coat, the tin ring catching one shard of sunlight. She would not give them the chase they craved. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low, steady, edged with iron. "It's done, written, witnessed. You've no say in it." The first hand spat in the dust. Every paper tears, every deal breaks. Before Ethan could answer, Sheriff Monroe moved. He slid between the four of them, his presence quiet but heavy as stone. "Court's that way," he said, pointing with his hat. "You've got a claim, you file it. Otherwise, keep your spit to yourself." The ranch hand's bravado faltered. But habit dies slow, and he reached, fingers brushing toward Nayeli's sleeve, just enough to test. Ethan's hand closed around the man's wrist before the touch landed. He didn't twist, he didn't break. He only held until the man's skin whitened and his eyes shifted from bold to calculating. Then he let go, slow and deliberate. The message was plain. Her body was not theirs to touch, and his restraint was a choice, not a weakness. The sheriff's hand settled heavy on the man's shoulder. "Not today," Monroe said. His tone carried no heat, only the certainty of a man too tired to waste breath. The street, sensing no fight would come, shifted back to business. Boots kept moving, wheels clattered. The cafe door swung on its hinge. Nayeli stood her ground. She did not hide behind Ethan, nor did she spit fire back. She simply remained, her presence unbroken, her name now written where no one could rub it out. Ethan untied the reins, set her mare close, and waited until she mounted. Sheriff Monroe tipped his hat low. "Ride on," he said. Not as blessing, not as order, just the next step named. Ethan swung into his saddle. Together, they turned down the street. Behind them, words and stares lost their bite against the clean weight of paper, the quiet strength of witnesses, and the unshakable fact of what had been spoken in daylight. By the time they cleared the last building, the noise of Copper Bend was already thinning. The road ahead ran wide and open. The creek line glinted silver in the sun. And though the mutters might follow, the vows had been set, and no man's spit could wash them away. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. By the time they crossed the second rise, Copper Bend was nothing but a smear of dust behind them. The creek caught sunlight in broken flashes, and Boone's bark floated faint from the yard, as if he had sensed them half a mile away. Ethan loosened the cinches and checked each hoof quick, the movements of a man whose hands were trained to routine. Nayeli stepped to the bucket rope and hauled water hand over hand. The mare lowered her head, drank long. Ethan watched her, not the horse, her balance, her rhythm, the way she claimed each small act without waiting for permission. Inside, the house still carried the warmth from the stove banked the night before. The square of light from the window had shifted to the far side of the table. Nayeli shrugged off the shawl the parson's wife had given her and hung it on a peg, not as a borrowed kindness, but as something that now belonged here. Ethan lifted the latch, then left it unthrown. He did not touch it again. Nayeli's eyes lingered on it a moment before moving on, knowing the choice rested in her own hand. They ate standing first, bread warmed on the stove board, the biscuit the parson's wife had pressed into her palm. Coffee poured dark, not left to boil bitter. Only when hunger eased did they sit, the table between them steady as stone. From his coat, Ethan drew out 2 torn halves of the auction paper. He laid them on the wood. Nayeli's breath caught. She had thought those scraps lost to dust in the yard. "Picked them up past the hitch," Ethan said. "Better the pieces sit where we say than in another man's pocket." She studied the clerk's mark, the blank where her name had never been written. Then she slid the halves into the tobacco tin beside the parson's paper. The tin clicked shut under her palm. Outside, Boone circled them as they walked the yard. The chain at the gate set one link tighter. Willow shoots lined the creek where spring water would rise. The corral sagged at the middle rail.
Ethan tested it with his boot, grunted. Needs a brace. He fetched the hammer. Nayeli brought nails. Shoulder to shoulder, they lifted the rail. He drove the brace home while she held steady. The board bit and stayed. When Ethan tested it twice with his hands and once with his hip, the whole pen straightened as if relieved of a long burden. Work finished, Nayeli beat the dust from her deerskin dress, clipped stray fringe, rethreaded 2 missing beads from the packet she had found in the trunk. She brushed the wool coat, folded it over the chair in the spare room, then turned the latch 1 full turn and left the sash a finger's width open. Air moved free. That was her decision. Ethan came back from the shed with a cedar plank under his arm. He set it on the table, sighted down the grain, then cut dovetails careful. The cedar lifted a clean smell into the room. Nayeli stitched a square of cotton, her name sewn neat into one corner, and placed it inside the tobacco tin. When Ethan fit the lid tight, she set the tin within the cedar box and closed it. "This stays where I can reach it without asking," she said. He nodded. Shelf by the window. Late afternoon thinned toward gold. They circled the yard again so Nayeli could learn it. The low spot that would turn to mud and thaw, the shed door that caught at the bottom, the cottonwoods marking the north edge. Boone ran ahead, then back, as if to map the same ground twice. Inside once more, Ethan checked the stove damper.
Nayeli set the cedar box on the shelf and laid her palm flat across its lid. The room carried a new sound, not just wood ticking as it cooled, not just Boone's sigh near the door, but the steady presence of 2 people who had placed their weight side by side. And as dusk drew down, the house began to learn their voices, as though it had waited for them both all along. By first thaw, the creek ran clear, its ice broken into thin shards drifting toward the bend. The cottonwoods pushed a hint of green at their tips, and the bean rows behind the house lay marked straight beneath Nayeli's hand. She sang low while she worked, a tune her grandmother had given her for steady fingers. Boone sprawled across the first furrow as though the song had been written for him. From the shed came the ring of Ethan's hammer. He set a new brace into the far fence and straightened the shed door with a shim. When he stepped back, the place looked as though it had taken a breath it had held too long. Evenings found them at the table. 2 plates, 2 cups. Ethan washed while Nayeli dried. The small cedar box sat on the shelf, holding the parson's paper, the clerk's copy, and the torn halves of the auction bill buried deep beneath. Sometimes Nayeli lifted the lid, not to check the papers, but to feel the grain of the wood under her palm. Proof that choices, once set, could hold. One afternoon, Mrs. Dayton rode in slow, a jug tied with cloth in her saddlebag. Her goat dog loped ahead. She swung down, set the jug on the bench, and said, "Milk, I'll take my jar back when you're done." Her eyes flicked toward Nayeli with the frankness of a woman who sees without prying. "I've cloth at home," Mrs. Dayton added. "Too stiff for my boys. Would make a skirt if washed twice." Nayeli nodded. "I'll come tomorrow. Choose it myself." Mrs. Dayton gave a satisfied tilt of her head and rode on. The simple exchange marked its place. Neighbors would see, not pretend not to. Days steadied. Ethan traded a day's hauling for a sound heifer at a neighbor's lot. Nayeli mended her dress with new thread from town. They filed a small brand mark for the South pasture in both their names, so anyone cutting wire would answer to a pair instead of a man alone. Nights carried their own quiet. Sometimes Nayeli left the spare room door wide, moonlight striping the floor. Other nights she closed it because rest asked for that shape. Either way, the choice was hers, and the latch turned in her hand. Ethan never touched it. One evening, when the frogs began their low chorus along the creek, Ethan sat on the porch bench he had built. Nayeli took her place at the left end. The shawl from the parson's wife hung on a peg above them, now part of the house. Boone lay stretched across the step, ribs rising and falling steady. Ethan looked out toward the cottonwoods, their shoots catching the last light. "Home," he said. Not a test, not a question, just the word that fit. Nayeli leaned her shoulder against his. "Home," she answered. The sound settled into the boards, into the rafters, into the air itself, as if the house had been waiting all along for that one word to root it. Inside, the cedar box sat firm on its shelf, the papers folded clean, the torn bill pressed flat beneath. Outside, the creek moved on in its bed, the cottonwoods held their place against the sky, and the night came down quiet. Tomorrow would bring more work, posts to set, rows to hoe, bread to bake.
But the weight of it was theirs to carry together, and that made all the difference. And as the stars came out sharp over the Arizona sky, the house breathed with them, steady and sure. No longer just walls and roof, but a place where freedom and trust had taken root, and where love could grow without fear. The story of Ethan and Nayeli is not just about two souls finding each other. It is a reminder of what the old frontier truly stood for. In the harsh silence of the desert, people learned that kindness could be stronger than cruelty, and that trust was often built one quiet choice at a time. These are the moments that echo through generations, stirring something deep in us because we all long for a place to belong, for love that does not break under the weight of hardship. If this tale touched you, it's because the heart of the West was never just dust, guns, and lawmen. It was about resilience, compassion, and the courage to choose hope. Stay with us for more true Wild West stories. Subscribe, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Your journey with us keeps these stories alive.